The world does not end when Benedict chooses Sophie, but it does begin to shift in ways no one can ignore. The ton moves on the surface, still attending balls, still exchanging pleasantries, still pretending that nothing extraordinary has happened. Yet beneath that polished calm, something fundamental has cracked. A line has been crossed, and once crossed, it can never truly be erased. Sophie feels this shift immediately. For the first time in her life, she is not reacting to events shaped by others. She is shaping them herself. Standing beside Benedict is not a fairy tale ending. It is a declaration. It tells the world that she will no longer shrink to make others comfortable, no longer apologize for existing, no longer accept love that comes with conditions attached. And while that realization empowers her, it also frightens her, because courage brings consequences. Benedict, too, feels the weight of what he has done. Choosing Sophie openly does not magically erase the expectations placed upon him. Family members respond with mixed emotions, some with quiet pride, others with concern masked as advice. He understands now that love does not shield you from judgment, it exposes you to it. Yet for the first time, he does not retreat. He listens, he absorbs, and he stands firm. Violet watches them both with a knowing gaze. She recognizes this moment for what it truly is, not just a love story, but a turning point. She has lived long enough to understand that change rarely arrives loudly. It arrives through people willing to be uncomfortable, willing to disappoint others, willing to choose truth over tradition. And in Sophie, Violet sees strength shaped by survival, not entitlement. As Sophie begins to navigate her new position in society, she quickly realizes that acceptance is selective. Some doors open easily, others remain firmly shut. Invitations arrive, but conversations remain guarded. Compliments are offered, but curiosity lingers beneath them. Sophie understands that society is not welcoming her. It is assessing her, measuring whether she will conform now that she has the status to do so. And Sophie surprises them all by refusing to play the expected role. She speaks when spoken to, but she also speaks when silence is expected. She treats servants with the same respect she once longed for, unsettling those who prefer hierarchy to remain untouched. Slowly, unintentionally, she becomes something far more threatening than a scandal. She becomes an example. Benedict notices this before anyone else does. He sees how Sophie's presence changes rooms, how her quiet confidence unsettles assumptions, and with admiration comes fear, not of Sophie, but for her. Because challenging society does not come without risk. Benedict understands now that protecting Sophie does not mean shielding her from the world. It means standing beside her when the world pushes back. Meanwhile, whispers grow louder around other corners of the ton. Stories spread not just about Sophie's rise, but about what it represents. Questions begin to surface. If Sophie can claim her place, what does that mean for others who have been pushed aside? If love can cross boundaries once, why not again? The rules that once felt immovable begin to look fragile. Francesca watches all of this quietly, absorbing more than she reveals. The tension between expectation and desire resonates deeply with her. She sees in Sophie a reflection of her own uncertainty, her own unspoken questions. And as Francesca's path begins to diverge from what society has planned for her, Sophie's courage plants a seed, one that will soon grow into something far more complicated. Eloise, too, is paying attention. Where once she resisted marriage as a concept, she now sees something new forming. Not submission, not obligation, but partnership built on mutual respect. It does not change her beliefs, but it challenges her assumptions, and that challenge will follow her into choices she has yet to face. But even as new possibilities emerge, not everyone welcomes this shift. Resistance forms quietly behind smiles and polite conversation. There are those who believe Sophie's story should be an exception, not a precedent, and exceptions are tolerated only so long as they do not inspire others. Sophie senses this tension, even as she moves forward. Happiness, she learns, is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to continue despite it. Yet one question lingers in her mind, refusing to fade. Has she truly escaped the past, or has she simply stepped into a new kind of battle? Because while love has given her strength, it has also made her visible. And visibility in a world built on control and tradition can be just as dangerous as invisibility ever was. As the season edges closer to its final moments, Pressure mounts, choices narrow, and the consequences of defiance begin to reveal themselves. Love has spoken, but the world has not yet given its answer. By the time Sophie realizes that visibility has its own dangers, it is already too late to step back into the shadows. Her presence beside Benedict has done more than confirm a love story. It has unsettled a system that depends on silence and compliance. The tone smiles, applauds, and pretends to accept what has happened, but beneath that polished surface, resistance is growing quietly and deliberately. Sophie begins to notice it in the smallest details: invitations that arrive late, conversations that stop when she enters a room, compliments that sound generous but carry an edge of warning. Society has not rejected her outright, because rejection would acknowledge her power. Instead, it tests her. It waits to see if she will soften, conform, and become grateful enough to forget what she represents. But Sophie does not forget. She cannot. Her past refuses to let her. Every moment of cruelty she endured, every injustice she survived, has sharpened her awareness. She knows now that acceptance is conditional, and conditions can always be revoked, so she chooses honesty over comfort, even when it costs her peace. Benedict feels the tension tightening around them. He sees how Sophie holds herself straighter, speaks more carefully, and measures every interaction not out of fear but out of experience. For the first time, he understands that loving Sophie means living with constant resistance. It is not dramatic confrontation that wears you down. It is persistent pressure, quiet judgment, and the expectation that eventually you will give in. As weeks pass, the ton begins to divide in subtle ways. Some admire Sophie openly, inspired by her refusal to shrink. Others resent her for reminding them of what they accepted too easily. And a third group, far more dangerous, sees her as a problem that must be contained before she inspires real change. This is when consequences arrive, not as scandal, but as strategy. Benedict's opportunities begin to narrow. Doors that once opened effortlessly now require explanation. His choices are questioned, his judgment quietly doubted. Nothing is said openly, but the message is clear. Love has a price, and he is expected to pay it. For Sophie, the pressure becomes deeply personal. She is praised for her grace, but criticized for her influence, encouraged to attend events, but discouraged from speaking too freely. Slowly, society attempts to reshape her into something safer, something quieter. A symbol without a voice, and Sophie faces a decision she never expected. She can choose ease, soften her presence, and secure her position, or she can remain exactly who she is and risk losing everything she has just gained. Love does not protect her from this choice, it amplifies it. Francesca watches Sophie closely during this time, recognizing a familiar ache. The struggle between inner truth and outward expectation mirrors her own unspoken conflict. She sees how love can be both liberating and isolating, how choosing yourself can mean standing alone even in crowded rooms. And quietly, Francesca begins to understand that her own future may demand a similar courage. Eloise, less subtle and far more observant, grows increasingly restless. Sophie's experience confirms what Eloise has always suspected, that society does not fear disobedience as much as it fears influence. Sophie is dangerous not because she broke rules, but because she survived them and refused to be grateful for the suffering that shaped her. The tension reaches a breaking point when Sophie is placed in an impossible position. An opportunity arises, one that would secure her status permanently, silence any lingering doubts, and protect Benedict from further consequence. All it requires is restraint, distance, a willingness to be less visible, less vocal, less herself. Benedict recognizes the trap immediately. This is the compromise he once offered her, disguised now as respectability instead of secrecy. And the realization cuts deeply. He understands that this moment is not just a test of Sophie's strength, but of his growth. This time he must not wait for Sophie to bear the cost alone. When Sophie finally speaks, her words are calm, measured, and devastatingly clear. She does not accuse, she does not plead, she simply refuses to trade her voice for comfort, refuses to accept protection that requires erasure, refuses to become an acceptable version of herself for anyone's peace of mind. The reaction is immediate and chilling. Support thins, allies retreat. The room grows quieter in a way that feels deliberate. Sophie has crossed another line, and this time the consequences will not be whispered. they will be enforced. As Benedict stands beside her, fully aware of what this refusal will cost them both, a realization settles in. Love has brought them here, but survival will require something more, something stronger, something that challenges not just society's rules, but its patience. Because once a woman refuses to be shaped, the consequences Sophie feared do not arrive all at once. They arrive quietly, carefully planned, wrapped in politeness and tradition. Society does not confront her directly, it isolates her. And isolation, Sophie quickly learns, can be far more destructive than open cruelty. It begins with absence. Invitations slow, then stop altogether. Friendly faces turn distant. Conversations that once included her now pass around her as if she were no longer present. Sophie understands this tactic immediately. The Ton is not punishing her loudly because that would give her power. Instead, it is attempting to erase her relevance. For Benedict, this shift is impossible to ignore. He watches Sophie navigate rooms where she is technically welcome but emotionally excluded. He sees how the same people who praised her bravery now avoid meeting her eyes. And with every step backward society takes, Benedict realizes that this resistance is not accidental. It is coordinated. Whispers grow sharper. Sophie is described as difficult, unsettling, too opinionated, too visible. These words are never spoken directly to her, but she hears them echoed in silence, in forced smiles, in the sudden coldness of once warm acquaintances. Society reframes her strength as a flaw, her integrity as defiance. And yet, Sophie does not retreat. She understands something now that she did not before. The world will never be satisfied with her obedience because obedience was never the goal. Control was, and control can only exist if she agrees to surrender herself piece by piece. Sophie refuses. This refusal carries real consequences. Benedict is summoned, advised, warned. Well-meaning voices urge him to reconsider his path. They speak of sacrifice as if it is noble, of compromise as if it is necessary. They remind him of his family's legacy, his responsibilities, his place. What they truly ask is simple: choose comfort over conflict. For a moment, doubt surfaces, not because Benedict fears loss, but because he fears causing Sophie pain. He wonders if love should require so much resistance, so much strain, and Sophie, sensing this hesitation, faces her own fear that she will once again be asked to shrink so someone else can breathe easier. This time, she speaks before silence can take root. Sophie tells Benedict the truth she has carried for years, that she would rather stand alone in honesty than be cherished in secrecy. That love which requires her disappearance is not love. It is survival dressed as affection. And hearing these words, Benedict understands something irreversible. Loving Sophie does not mean saving her from the world. It means choosing her even when the world responds with punishment. So when the Ton applies pressure, Benedict does something unexpected. He does not argue. He does not explain. He withdraws his participation entirely. He stops attending gatherings designed to measure compliance. He refuses opportunities offered as leverage. Quietly, firmly, he steps out of the game. This decision sends shockwaves, not because it is dramatic, but because it is final. Society relies on engagement to maintain control. Withdrawal destabilizes it, and Sophie realizes that for the first time, someone is not asking her to endure alone. Still, the resistance intensifies. Not against Benedict, but against Sophie. Her reputation becomes a topic of speculation. Her influence is framed as dangerous. The narrative shifts subtly, painting her not as a survivor, but as a disruptor. And then comes the moment Sophie never anticipated. Someone else speaks up. A woman. Then another, quietly at first, then with growing confidence. They do not challenge the Ton directly, but they align themselves with Sophie publicly. They invite her. They stand beside her. They refuse to treat her as an exception that must be contained. What begins as isolation turns into tension. Sophie realizes that her story has reached people who have been waiting for proof that resistance is possible. Not safe, not easy, but possible. And this realization terrifies the Ton more than any scandal ever could, because influence spreads faster than control. As alliances shift and quiet support grows, society faces a choice it never expected to make: adapt, or enforce its authority with force. And Sophie understands now that her story is no longer just her own. It has become a challenge to the world that tried to define her. But challenges provoke backlash. And as power consolidates against her once more, Sophie is forced to confront the most dangerous question of all. When standing your ground inspires others, how far will the world go to make you kneel? The shift that Sophie inspired does not go unnoticed, and it does not go unchallenged. Change may begin quietly, but resistance rarely stays silent for long. As more women align themselves with Sophie, some openly, others through careful gestures, the Ton responds with something far more dangerous than gossip. It responds with unity. Meetings happen behind closed doors. Decisions are made without Sophie's presence, without Benedict's influence, without any voice that might question tradition. The rules do not change, they tighten. And suddenly, what once felt like social pressure becomes something colder and more deliberate. Sophie senses it before she sees it. The air feels different, heavier. Conversations feel rehearsed, smiles feel calculated, and kindness feels conditional again. The difference now is that Sophie understands what is happening. This is not disapproval. This is containment. The Ton does not want Sophie punished publicly because punishment creates martyrs. Instead, it wants her diminished. Opportunities begin to vanish. Her influence is restricted, her presence managed, her participation controlled. Invitations that once symbolized acceptance are replaced by obligations meant to exhaust her. Sophie is kept busy, visible but ineffective, present but powerless. And when that fails, the narrative shifts. Questions are raised about her character. Her past is revisited, subtly reframed. Her time as a servant is no longer treated as a tragedy, but as proof that she does not fully belong. The lies are careful, crafted just enough to cast doubt without inviting scrutiny. Society knows exactly how to erode credibility without appearing cruel. Benedict is furious when he realizes what is happening. He confronts those he once trusted, only to be met with calm explanations and gentle concern. They claim to be protecting stability. They insist that Sophie's influence is disruptive. They frame exclusion as necessity, resistance as recklessness. And Benedict understands then that this was never about Sophie alone. It was about preserving power. The strain begins to show, not between Sophie and Benedict, but around them. Their presence together becomes symbolic, and symbols attract pressure. Benedict's family feels it. His siblings notice the shift in how doors open or don't. Violet, perceptive as ever, recognizes the pattern immediately. She has seen it before in quieter forms in different generations. Violet warns them gently. Change invites retaliation, and retaliation rarely announces itself. Sophie listens, but she does not retreat. She has endured worse than whispered threats and social maneuvering. What unsettles her is not fear, it is responsibility. She sees the effect her stance has on others, women watching her, listening, waiting to see whether resistance leads to ruin or resilience. And then, the Ton makes its boldest move yet. An accusation surfaces, not criminal, not dramatic, but devastating in its implication. Sophie is accused of manipulation, of ambition disguised as virtue, of using Benedict and others to elevate herself beyond her station. The accusation spreads slowly, carefully, carried by people who appear sympathetic rather than hostile. This is the danger Sophie feared most, not direct attack, but distortion, the transformation of strength into suspicion. Benedict moves to defend her immediately, but Sophie stops him. For the first time, she understands that defense from him, no matter how sincere, will be framed as proof of the accusation. The world expects her to be spoken for. She refuses. Instead, Sophie chooses visibility on her own terms. At a gathering designed to limit her voice, Sophie speaks calmly without accusation or emotion. She does not justify her existence or apologize for her influence. She tells the truth of her life, not as a plea, but as a statement. She speaks of survival, of erasure, of how easily power mistakes silence for consent. She does not ask for approval. She claims space. The reaction is immediate and divided. Some are unsettled. Some are threatened. Some are quietly moved in ways they do not yet understand. But everyone realizes the same thing. Sophie cannot be controlled quietly anymore. And with that realization